Analyzing the style of a text is all about examining how language is used to achieve particular effects, how those elements of word choice and word arrangement and word sound are used to create particular effects on the listener, on the audience. In literary analysis, like the kinds of analyses you performed in ninth and 10th grade and that you will perform in AP Lit, in literary analysis you would examine how elements of style are used to enhance the reader's understanding of literary elements, such as a particular character's like characterization, or a particular theme, or a symbol within the text, or how it enhances the reader's experience of a particular setting within a story or the mood. In rhetorical analysis, the kind of analysis we focus on in AP Lang, you would instead examine how elements of style are designed to enhance the sort of rhetorical techniques that we've been studying by making a greater impact on what the audience thinks, feels, and how they perceive the writer. Regardless of what kind of analysis you're performing, generally speaking, when you analyze style, you want to look for ways in which the stylistic devices and elements you find are clarifying certain ideas, emphasizing certain ideas, suggesting or implying certain ideas that may not necessarily be stated, or ways in which those stylistic elements are amusing or pleasing the audience. However, I must warn you that last effect, providing amusement or pleasure to the audience, should be discussed very sparingly in rhetoric, and that's just because that's the sort of thing you would write about again for the kinds of text, the kind of genre that are meant to be performed aloud, because you have to hear those kind of things that are considered amusing or pleasing, like rhythms and word arrangement and phonetic sounds and word sound, that sort of thing. So while we may talk a little bit about how certain stylistic devices can be used to create pleasing elements or witticisms or that sort of thing, we're going to focus on that third one, or that fourth one rather, very sparingly in this class. Let's begin looking at style analysis by looking at elements of word choice. We'll explore word arrangement in the next lesson, but for now let's look at word choice. So when analyzing elements of word choice, you always want to focus on the word's connotation. Remember the difference between denotation and connotation. These are terms you should have seen in previous English courses. Denotation is the literal meaning of the word's intellectual dimension, while connotation is the other ideas the word communicates, including the word's emotional, sensuous, and imaginative dimensions. Yeah, to elaborate a little bit more on what those dimensions of connotation are, when you look at a word's connotation, you're essentially trying to figure out three different things. First of all, its emotional dimension, the emotions and feelings that a word conjures or connotes when it's read. The sensuous dimension, which are the physical sensations, the sights, sounds, tastes, smells, and touches that a word connotes when read. And lastly, the imaginative dimension. This is all the related ideas or concepts, whether it's different works of literature or different characters from literature, various myths, historical events, or any other related ideas that word kind of communicates when you read it. Time to pause the video to complete a short reflection. Reflect on the following questions in paragraphs. Make sure you write informally and off the top of your head. So generally speaking, when you're trying to analyze word choice, you're looking at the word's connotation and those three dimensions of connotation there. However, here are some more specific elements to look for that fall under that word choice category. I like to tell students to focus on these four specifically. There are others, but these are the four really big ones that can help you a lot. You want to look for individual choices of words, patterns of diction, which is patterns of word choice throughout larger sections of text, imagery, which is sensory language, and figurative language. Let's look at each of those four elements more closely, and we'll start with analyzing individual word choices. When you analyze individual words, you want to examine how they are used to characterize something or emphasize a certain idea. Yeah, sometimes you can look at just single words at a time, and that can be significant. Sometimes a text, some significant idea within a text hinges on this really important word that is only used one time. That can happen. However, more likely you're going to be looking for groups of words that are working together to achieve the same effect, to characterize something or emphasize a certain idea. Once you've identified some particularly connotative individual words and explained how they are meant to characterize and emphasize, you next want to relate your findings to a specific rhetorical choice that the writer is making. Ask yourself, does this word choice enhance some argument that the writer is trying to make? Does this use of word enhance some persona the writer is trying to create? Or does it enhance some emotional appeal the writer is trying to make? That is how we talk about the use of individual words along with rhetorical analysis. Time to pause this video to practice what we just learned. Read a text by Pope Urban II from back in the 11th century, his speech to the council at Clermont. Then examine Urban II's individual word choice and respond to the questions that you're given using one or two complete sentences for each. All right, so let's look at how this word is used there in the paragraph. The kingdom of the Greeks is now dismembered by them referring to the Muslim invaders, and deprived of territory so vast in extent that it cannot be traversed in a march of 2 months. All right, so literally what he's saying here is that the Greek kingdom has been broken apart or divided. You might imagine this conquering army has kind of taken over a large swath of the kingdom and is kind of cutting into the kingdom's territory. And so that's what's literally meant here by dismembered, kind of the breaking apart of the Greek kingdom. Figuratively, or connotatively rather, what he's trying to suggest is that Greece is like some sort of captured prisoner being tortured and their body being defiled, because that's what the word dismembered conjures, is like an individual having their arms and their legs cut off as part of some sort of torture ceremony or torture practice or something like that. So he's trying to characterize Greece here as some sort of helpless prisoner who's being afflicted with all of these pains and miseries unjustly, that sort of thing. So what is he using this individual word choice to help him do rhetorically? Well, I think he's trying to, again, I asked about how he's enhancing an emotional appeal. I think he's trying to make his audience feel enmity, indignation. I think enmity is probably the stronger emotion here. Enmity means hatred. He's trying to make the audience of the French nobleman feel hatred, so much hatred toward these Muslims for invading a part of the Christian kingdoms here, that they would go down there and fight. And so by referring to Greece as being dismembered, like this helpless prisoner being defiled, that just stirs up even more hatred. How dare they do that to one of our kind, that sort of thing. So there's definitely a lot of us versus them rhetoric in here, a lot of trying to stir hatred toward the enemy. And I think this unique word choice with the heavy connotations that dismember carries really helps him do that. Moving on from individual word choice, let's look next at patterns of diction. Okay? When you analyze patterns of diction, you're trying to examine the overall qualities of the language used. Yeah, you're looking for patterns and trends of the word choice that's used across the whole text, or at least very large sections of the text. Yeah, there is a very big difference between diction and word choice. Okay? Word choice implies that you're looking at a single isolated word or a collection of words used to achieve one particular effect by characterizing something, emphasizing something. Diction has more to do with the qualities of language and the trends of language used throughout a text. Once you have identified some particular pattern or trend in diction, you need to then relate your findings again to some specific rhetorical choice the writer's making. Usually, diction is used to enhance some persona. that the writer's trying to adopt. Sometimes it's also used to enhance an emotional appeal as well, but those are the two big ones that diction is used to enhance and work with in rhetoric. Finally, when trying to describe the diction that you see in a text, here are some helpful adjectives that you might want to use. You might describe diction as being formal or informal, as high or low, meaning high meaning high in vocabulary, low meaning simple and low in vocabulary. You might say that it's the writer's using technical diction. Another term for technical diction would be like jargon. Abstruse diction would be diction that's so erudite that lay people can't really understand it. Concrete diction versus abstract diction, archaic diction, poetic diction, colloquial diction, which would be like regional sayings and that sort of thing, like y'all, that's a colloquialism. Vulgar diction or slang, those are all different adjectives that you can use to describe the diction that you see. And you never, ever in a rhetorical analysis or any other analysis want to just talk about the writer's diction in general. You have to say what kind of diction it is. Otherwise, you're just saying the writer's use of words, which doesn't mean anything. Time to pause the video again for another exercise. Look back at Pope Urban II's speech, and this time examine his diction throughout the text, responding to the questions that you're given using, again, just one or two complete sentences for each one. So Urban II's diction really stays the same throughout the whole passage. Let's just read a little bit from the middle here. Let the deeds of your ancestors move you and incite your minds to manly achievements. The glory and greatness of King Charles the Great and of his son Louis and of your other kings who have destroyed the kingdoms of the pagans and have extended in these lands the territory of the Holy Church. Yeah, his diction here is very formal, right? So we would call this formal diction. I don't know that I'd go so much as to call this high diction. It's not elevated to really high levels of vocabulary, but it's definitely formal. It's definitely not informal. So we could call this formal diction, or you could call it ceremonial diction, because he's using a lot of words that would have kind of ceremonial connotations and that sort of thing. So either of those two words works. So what is he doing with this ceremonial or formal diction? Well, I think it's all part of building his persona of that of an impressive authoritative leader, right? So he's building this authoritative persona. Remember, the Pope was the head of the Catholic Church. There was no Protestant church at this time, so the only Christian church in Europe at this time. He was the head of it all, and so he has to maintain that sort of authoritative persona. And I think a formal use or a use of formal diction and ceremonial diction is important to maintaining that authoritative persona and kind of demonstrating how serious he takes this situation and this event. Moving on to the third specific word choice element, let's look at imagery. When analyzing imagery, the very first thing I'd like you to do is to first make sure you're actually seeing imagery. For whatever reason, just the way that we teach imagery in middle and early high school, a lot of students like to call things imagery that aren't actually imagery. In order for what you see to be imagery, the language has to evoke specific physical sensations. And remember, we have 5 physical sensations: sight, smell, taste, sound, touch. It has to evoke one or more of those sensations. That means the language has to be pretty concrete as well. Abstract language doesn't really evoke images at all. So be very careful there. Don't invent images that just aren't there and call it imagery, because that's not correct. Next, when analyzing imagery, you have to identify the different types of images that are used, or the one type of image that is used, depending on what you see. To do this, you need to learn the correct adjective forms of the 5 physical sensations. Images that help us see things, we call that visual imagery. Images that stir sounds, we call that auditory imagery. Images that evoke sense of smell, that's olfactory image. Imagery that evokes taste, that's gustatory imagery. And lastly, touch sensations, that's tactile imagery. Once you've identified the specific kind of imagery you're looking at, you should next examine the specific sensations that the sensory language actually evokes. Describe what the writer is meaning the audience to experience when they read that sensory language, and how they're supposed to be affected by it. What they see, what they're meant to see, what they're meant to hear, what they're meant to smell, and also all the associated feelings that go along with those physical sensations. Then, as with the other elements of word choice and all style elements in general, you need to relate your findings to some specific rhetorical choice. Usually, imagery is used to enhance emotional appeals. In fact, that's almost solely what it's used for in persuasive texts. Sometimes it can be used to make ideas within arguments more forceful, but more often than not, it's going to be used to try to provoke or stir particular emotions, or strengthen the emotional appeals that the writer is trying to make. Pause this video for another exercise. Look back at the speech you've been looking at and examine Pope Urban II's use of imagery in his speech. Respond to the questions you're given using just 1 or 2 complete sentences each. So let's look at the imagery here. They, meaning the invading Muslims, they destroy the altars after having defiled them with their uncleanness. They circumcise the Christians, and the blood of the circumcision they either spread upon the altars or pour into the vases of the baptismal font. Oh my, that's dark. Okay, so that very first sentence was very abstract, but the second sentence describing this, like unwanted circumcision and the blood being smeared on this and poured into that, that is some rich visual imagery, right? He's trying to help the audience really see and experience the carnage and the defilement of these churches in the Holy Land. Seeing all of the blood, that's a very vivid image, and of course the source of that blood from circumcision, that's a very gruesome sort of thing there. So yeah, he's again trying to enhance his emotional appeals here, I think. That's how I would write about it. And that's because sensations, physical sensations, sight, smell, sound, taste, touch, those are deeply connected to emotional responses. And so again, I think he's trying to provoke, trying to enhance his previous appeals to hatred, to enmity, and also provoke a little bit of disgust here as well. This is designed to, this vivid, gruesome imagery, this visual imagery is designed to make his audience feel kind of queasy and disgusted. And so that heavily plays into his appeals to enmity and hatred as well. Because if he can get them feeling disgusted about how their churches have been defiled and their people, their fellow Christians have been, harmed in this way in such a gruesome manner, then that will make them hate the enemy all the more. Finally, let's look at figurative language. When you analyze figurative language in a text, you first want to identify the type of figurative language used. And there are tons of different types of figures of speech out there. For our purposes in this course, it's really only important that you learn these 5. It's great if you can identify more, but these are the 5 most important. And I've divided them into figures of comparison, which would be your metaphor, simile, personification, and then figures of amplification, which would be your understatement, overstatement, also called hyperbole. Once you've identified the type of figure that you're seeing, you next want to examine how the figurative meaning is intended to enhance what is literally meant. Okay, so even though figurative language is not meant to be taken literally, that's kind of that creates a misunderstanding. No, we're supposed to be able to interpret what is literally meant as well. It's the figurative meaning is intended to add additional meanings on top of the intended literal meaning. Okay, so if it's a comparison, ask yourself, how is the literal thing being talked about? How is that being characterized by the figurative thing it's being compared to? Okay, if the writer's making an exaggeration like understatement or hyperbole, ask yourself what truth is being highlighted about the literal thing through this exaggerated figurative language. Next, you want to relate your findings to some specific rhetorical choice. Figurative language, like analyzing individual words, can be used to enhance reasoning appeals, character appeals, and emotional appeals. It can really just be used for anything. All right, let's pause this video one more time, look back again at Pope Urban's speech, and examine his use of figurative language. You want to respond to the questions you're given, again, in just one or two complete sentences each. All right, let's look at the two figures of speech we identified in this last paragraph. First, referring to Jerusalem as the navel of the world. Well, comparing Jerusalem to a human navel, that's of course implying that Jerusalem is kind of the birthplace of humanity, right? Which is not geographically true or anything like that, but of course the Pope is Christian, and so the world didn't begin until Christianity began, and so at this time it would be the center of Christianity. And so, yeah, he's saying that Jerusalem is where all of Christianity, all life that's important to him began. And thus, there's kind of the beginnings of these comparisons to the Holy Lands as a sort of feminine figure as well, because the use of the word the comparisons to a navel often has a lot of feminine connotations, like I kind of explained in the exercise. It's used as a symbol of the womb oftentimes, even though the navel and the womb aren't the same thing. For hundreds of years of writing, it was kind of used as a symbol of a woman's womb, where life sort of is created. Later in the paragraph, of course, we have that lovely personification, referring to Jerusalem as she and her. She desires to be liberated. She's imploring you. She wants you to help her. That's that sort of thing. Again, kind of characterizing Jerusalem as this feminine figure. And if we think back to the very first exercise from this lesson, that's kind of continued over from the comparison or the suggestion of the kingdom of Greece as kind of this helpless prisoner. Well, now we're characterizing the Holy Land as this helpless figure as well. And so that's, again, designed to enhance his appeals to the audience's sympathies, to really try to make them feel so overwhelmed with pity and sympathy for what's going on there that they will leave their homes behind and go risk their lives to wrest it back for a kingdom that's not even theirs. It's just related to them because they are also Christian. So I think that the figurative language here is really important, enhancing kind of a sort of motif throughout this speech, that of characterizing the captured areas, the areas that the Muslims captured, as helpless and somewhat feminine as well, which, hey, that would really work for all these men in the audience. The audience is exclusively men, right? This is the Middle Ages, the age of chivalry and all that. And so men were expected to go to the aid of helpless women and all that. So it really kind of works to hit on their sympathy centers and enhance that emotional appeal. You may have noticed in this lesson that I haven't discussed two really big elements. Yeah, I'm talking about tone and mood. Tone, of course, is the writer's perceived attitude toward their subject matter, and mood is the emotional atmosphere the writer is trying to create for the audience. A lot of developing writers in AP Lang try to discuss these elements in rhetorical analysis, and it's because they're really, really important elements in literary analysis, which 9th and 10th grade is predominantly focused on. However, tone and mood are best left just to literary analysis. You want to leave them alone in rhetorical analysis. The reason for this, hopefully, is pretty clear. In rhetoric, the writer's perceived attitude toward their subject matter, their tone, well, that's really just part of their persona in a character appeal. Yeah, also in rhetoric, any mood that the writer's trying to create, well, we call that a pathos appeal. So in rhetorical analysis, instead of talking about tone and mood, anytime you feel like you want to analyze tone or mood, talk instead about character and emotional appeals. That's much more effective and much more to the point in rhetorical analysis. So why are we doing this? Why are we learning about style and style analysis? Well, style analysis is important in the study of rhetorical analysis. It can add a great deal of depth to the rhetorical techniques that you analyze. Here then are some guidelines for how you can incorporate style analysis into the rhetorical analysis model that we've already been practicing. For one, you want to add style analysis to your text evidence and explanations. That's where it goes within your paragraph. You want to identify specific stylistic elements like metaphors and certain kinds of imagery, that sort of thing. Identify that within your text evidence. And in your explanations, you want to explain how they are used to help produce the intended effects of the rhetorical technique on the audience. You also want to avoid identifying any style elements in your topic statement because the topic statement identifies what the focus of your paragraph is, and we should not be focusing paragraphs on style elements just yet. We still want our paragraphs focused on rhetorical techniques, not style elements, and just use those style elements as part of our explanation of the rhetorical techniques. And here is an example of how that's done, starting with my topic sentence. Florence Kelly attempts to open her audience's hearts to the plight of the children with appeals to pity and shame. Notice how my topic sentence does not identify any specific stylistic elements. I've saved that for my evidence and explanation. Moving on. In paragraph 3, she employs enargeia, inviting her audience to imagine several thousand little girls working in textile mills all the night through in the deafening noise of the spindles and the looms. Enargeia, if you're not familiar, is just vivid imagery. It's another term for vivid images. I follow that up with explanation. The visual and auditory imagery, there I've identified the kinds of imagery, is intended to stir pity for these children. While Kelly's reminders that they are doing this while the audience sleeps is to produce the, quote, cotton and wool, silks and ribbons for the audience to buy, is designed to shame the audience for their complicity in the abusive labor system. She reinforces these emotional appeals through figurative language, referring to the children as little beasts of burden forced to take loads of finished clothing and deliver them to people's homes. This metaphor compares child laborers to pack animals, like horses and oxen, suggesting that, like these animals, the children are used as tools and are denied the dignities commonly afforded to human beings, such as the right to an education and self-determination. And then the rest of my paragraph is pretty much the same as it's always been. Kelly's emotional appeals are designed to overcome her audience's lack of emotional attachment to the issue, as few of her mostly middle class and wealthy audience are likely blah, blah, blah. We've seen the rest of this paragraph before. So this is how you would insert or add style analysis to help enhance your rhetorical analysis. Time for a practice activity. In your interactive notes, there's a space to write a paragraph. I want you to think about the stylistic elements you've examined this lesson and write a paragraph in which you analyze one rhetorical technique that Urban II uses to help achieve his purpose and incorporate style analysis like you saw in the example.